Well, it's going from bad to worse to abominable for Yorkshire Cricket Club, as earlier on Wednesday it was forced into suspending its head coach Andrew Gale over some historic tweets. This days after another allegation of racism from a former academy player, this time Irfan Amjad, who claims he was victimized when he was 16 years old. Yorkshire has also opened a probe after its head of human resources called a supporter a coward and accused that supporter of, quote, waging a campaign, end of quote, against the club on social media. Now, the racism scandal engulfing Yorkshire began in September last year when ex-player Azim Rafiq first spoke out. This is a timeline of a scandal which has also engulfed a former England captain, a former England test batsman, and caused Yorkshire to lose some of its highest profile sponsors. So, September 2, 2020, Rafiq claimed institutional racism at Yorkshire. A day later, Yorkshire launched a formal investigation into Rafiq's claims. 2 months later, in December, Rafiq filed a legal claim against Yorkshire claiming direct discrimination and harassment. Fast forward to 2021, in February, Yorkshire threatened a lifetime ban for anyone guilty of threats against Rafiq. June 17, legal claim between Rafiq and Yorkshire failed to find resolution. August this year, Yorkshire received the findings of an independent investigation of the racism allegations made by Rafiq. August 19, Yorkshire admitted Rafiq was, quote, the victim of inappropriate behavior and offered their, quote, profound apologies. September 10, Yorkshire released findings and said Rafiq was, quote, the victim of racial harassment and bullying, but insufficient evidence to conclude that Yorkshire County Cricket Club is institutionally racist. November 3, 2021, several sponsors ended their partnership with Yorkshire County Cricket Club. So, November 4, no, it doesn't finish, it's not over. ECB suspended Yorkshire from hosting international matches. November 5, Yorkshire Chairman Roger Hutton resigned and apologized unreservedly to Rafiq. November 8, Monday this week, New Yorkshire Chairman Lord Patel praised Rafiq's bravery as a whistleblower and announced that the club settled the legal claims Rafiq filed last December. Alright, so the now former chairman of Yorkshire has been summoned by the UK Parliament to answer questions about how the club handled the allegations of institutional racism leveled by Rafiq on November 16. Joining us to discuss this situation, which is unraveling from a Yorkshire perspective, is the English-based cricket commentator David Brook. David, welcome back to the SportsMax Zone. Good to have you.
George, good to see you.
Good. Let's start first with just clearing up a term for the benefit of our viewers. Institutional racism. By my appreciation of the term, institutional racism, which Yorkshire has been accused of being an institutionally racist organization, it means that within the structure of Yorkshire Cricket Club, there is promoted a sense that whites are superior. That's what institutional racism means. And that institutional racism also means that the structures, the laws, the rules, the policies and procedures within Yorkshire are designed to maintain the status quo where whites are superior. Also, institutional racism means that access to certain opportunities within the structure of Yorkshire Cricket Club is dependent on what color you are. So perhaps it is, from Rafiq's perspective, whites have access to all opportunities, blacks a few, Asian, people of Asian descent, a few. So it's not equal opportunity for all because of the institutional racism. So I'm starting with that to see if you agree with what institutional racism is from the perspective of Rafiq accusing Yorkshire.
Yeah, I think it's fair, your summary here, George, and all the facts that you've stated on the way in. I mean, the simple fact of the matter is you're not seeing enough non-white players getting through the system and breaking out into the Yorkshire team, and it seems like that culture is ingrained throughout the organisation, and that's why with the appointment of Lord Patel as the new chairman, things are going to change very fast. And as you said, there's been like a revolving door of executives, the latest head coach to be suspended. The rumours are that the chief executive officer is going to be the next to go. We've already seen the director of cricket, Martin Watson, who's gone, is now sick, stressed, gone off ill with a stress-related injury. So, you know, it's all adding up to the need for a complete root and branch change at the club, so that Yorkshire is a county for everyone in Yorkshire.
In this day and age, David, of highly charged sensibilities and sensitivities around the issue of race and how race is dealt with on a casual level and at the institutional level. From your perspective, how could Yorkshire believe that such an issue as that raised by Rafiq, investigated, could be kept under the carpet, could be the report hidden from the public, the matter almost an attempt of trying to sweep it under the carpet? I ask you from your professional perspective, how did Yorkshire think they could get away with that in this time?
Yeah, well, again, completely spot on there, George. It's completely inept, isn't it? The best you can say about it is it's inept, completely insensitive, and misses out on all the progress that's been made and the climate on which this incident has been reported. The failure to properly apologise until very recently, the failure to dismissing it as banter and this sort of thing, trying to trivialise the incident. It really hasn't reflected well on the club. And this, as you say, given your timeline, it's gone back such a long way that now the hope is that with the new broom, things can really change at the top and change the culture throughout the organisation.
And the fact that you say this has gone on for so long, now Lord Patel comes in as the new chairman and, they're setting up these whistle-blowing hotlines and whatnot. Do you feel as if it's going to be an easy process? Because it seems as if this rotten culture of racism is embedded in the system at Yorkshire. And how difficult will it be to eradicate it completely?
Well, I think it is going to be a really tricky process, isn't it? It's going to be a tough times ahead for Yorkshire, because everything's amplified by social media. It's not, you can't brush anything under the carpet. Yeah, Lord Patel's done all the right things though in his first 4 days in position. And as you say, one of the things he's set up is a hotline, an independent hotline, where people historically feel that they haven't been treated fairly can actually put a complaint up and be actually listened to this time. As your timeline indicated, the original complaint goes back such a long way. Why wasn't it dealt with at the time? And in the recent publication of the report, to describe it as a bit of banter and to try and brush it under the carpet was a huge mistake.
For any sporting organisation or body to flourish, they need support of sponsors. They need proper sponsorship. When George read the timeline, I realised that when the sponsors pulled out, it's when we heard from Yorkshire Cricket Club. Do you get the sense that that's probably the only reason why they spoke up?
Well, the sponsors pulled out once they'd seen the way that Yorkshire had responded to the publication of the report. And I think that's one of Lord Patel's absolute priorities, is to try and get the sponsors back. I mean, Yorkshire is almost like a county within its own culture anyway. So that was the last county cricket club to allow anyone from outside Yorkshire to play for them. They continued with that policy long after, no one else followed it in the UK, and they continued with no overseas players until the 90s, I think it was. So they've got its own culture, a culture of exceptionalism perhaps. But obviously this is opening a can of worms. There's the failure of the system to produce enough cricketers of non-white origin. There's obviously a fault in the system there. It might not just be within Yorkshire. And, this question of prejudice runs across the world, doesn't it? But in the case of Yorkshire, it's become the epicentre for this issue right now.
Yeah, David, you use the word inept. I would suggest that it could be a stronger term here, because this is a historical and cultural with Yorkshire. You just mentioned correctly that they have been not embracing of people, not only outside of England, but outside of Yorkshire. I remember in the glory days of West Indies cricket, where the top players were representing Hampshire and Derbyshire and Lancashire and those teams. None of the West Indians played for Yorkshire. I think Richard Richardson had a short contract there in the mid-1990s. But isn't it strange that I can think of a few top English Premier League football clubs who, up to some time ago, were reluctantly embracing black players into their setup. Why would Yorkshire be hanging on for this so long in these times?
It is extraordinary, yeah. I said it best inept. I think that is not a strong enough word. It's not particularly well chosen. I think you're right. in this day and age, how can they possibly justify a system where recreational cricket is so popular, in particular amongst a very large South East Asian community, that we're not seeing enough players getting through into the so-called pathways into the system. As we've talked before about the lack of black coaches in the English game overall. But Yorkshire's always had this issue, and it's indefensible in this day and age.
Yeah, Vivian Richards, IVA Richards, said to the Antigua Observer this week that it was very, very difficult in his playing days for the teams he played. Somerset was his main team, of course. Going to Yorkshire, he recalled many, many horrifying moments that he endured at Yorkshire.
You look at the neighbouring county of Lancashire with its history of taking West Indian players into the leagues, into the Lancashire League, from
Clive Lloyd,
Constantine through George Headley, Clive Lloyd. You haven't seen any of that in Yorkshire. I'm not saying that's the sole reason, but it's interesting that Yorkshire has these issues of insularity that you don't see in other counties.
Yeah. The last question before we let you go, David. Do you believe that, given that Yorkshire, the most successful English county cricket side, one that has a sterling reputation in many respects, very powerful. You mentioned that Yorkshire held on to this exclusivity for so long, and its stature in the English game. Do you believe that were it what we can call, for the purposes of this conversation, a lesser county involved in what was happening, that the ECB would have taken a more stringent watching brief earlier in the process to ensure that it husbanded this process through to ensure that nothing was hidden or no attempt was made to hide anything?
I'm not sure I'd go as far as to say that, because that suggests that the ECB has been right on the ball on this and been completely supportive. ECB had the opportunity to get involved over the last 18 months, and for whatever reason it hasn't. So I'm not sure it would have treated any other county differently, but as it is, as you know, international matches have been suspended at Headingley, and we've seen the suspension of Gary Balance, the player who was guilty of
the racial slur against Rafiq.
Racial slur against Rafiq, thank you. And so whether they'd have done it differently with another club, I'm not sure, George. Now they've acted, as you say, there's a parliamentary select committee inquiry into this next Tuesday. So it's top priority now, and hopefully with a new broom and completely new, well, it's going to take a while, isn't it, to change the culture of the place, but it's not before time, and it's a shame that this has happened in the way that it has. Yeah,
I'll be watching that parliamentary committee sitting next Tuesday. Let's see what happens, and we can talk after that. Thank you, David. All the best.
Thank you very much, George.
Good. David Brook there, our guy in England, talking cricket and Yorkshire Cricket Club. And what Sir IVA Richards said this week, if anybody who was following the story wasn't disgusted, it raised it lifted the veil rather off it. Yorkshire, by its reputation and standing, they've always been issues for players who are non-white. And as Sir Viv said, look, these issues have just risen up since Rafiq has been there.
Yeah.
From we were there playing and conquering England on the county scene, these issues were there.
That was late 70s and 80s.
That's a big problem.
It's a rotten culture. And I find it so ironic because when we talk about cricket, we love to call it a gentleman's game. And George and Lance, there was nothing gentlemanly about this situation. And you asked a question to David about the ECB. And I have to say I'm very disappointed in them because they really want to be pushing the Black Lives Matter movement. Take the knee, wear a t-shirt, but when we actually had it happening out raw, they were not involved. I have to say they were probably the last one to get involved, and for me that's very disappointing.
You know, Lance, I always want to picture myself sitting in these confabs where there's a crisis on hand and you're devising a strategy. Imagine yourself in the room.
What do you picture it to be like?
Well,
you mean the ECB room?
No,
the
Yorkshire room. Imagine the
room.
Yorkshire room where this report has been done. You have the findings, and you say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to publish the full report. We're going to try to manage this, and we're not going to expose Michael Vaughan, who was accused of saying there's too many of you Indians around this place, and we're going to do something about it. Vaughan is accused of that. He denies it, but someone who was a third party they heard him say that, so he's in some trouble. Then Gary Balance, who called Azim Rafiq the slur that was used to describe Pakistanis, people of Pakistani origin in Britain. How could you come up with a harebrained idea to do what Yorkshire eventually did, because guess what they probably said? You know what? If we publish the full report and deal with it on a front foot level, we're going to alienate sponsors. We're going to turn people off. So let's not alienate sponsors. Let's not turn people off by doing this way. Only for it, in the way that they handle it, to alienate people and turn off sponsors. It's stupid. You can't do that in this day and age. You can't do that in this day and age. It's a disgrace.
No, but it just shows the level at how bad it is, George, that they don't see, the way that they handle it, they don't see what they're doing as wrong.
Yep. So Gary Balance says he used the racial slur to Rafiq, and he knows it gnawed at him, but it was just banter. One man's banter is criminal to the next man.
You know, I was listening to an interview. I know you want to jump in. And George, you know what they were saying in the interview? One player was saying that whenever the clouds were getting dark and it was about to rain, so like say you were the West Indies player on the team, they would say, oh, look, George is coming. Like...
Yep. Yes.
You know, I wanted, before we wrap this segment, to just bring in the Andrew Gale issue, because he was suspended today as a head coach following an anti-Semitic slur that he had tweeted 10 years ago and removed it. According to him, he didn't know that it was offensive in the way that it was to Jews. And I'm saying that there could be instances where there could be some innocence in some of these issues. I don't know how guilty Gale is. It's possible that he genuinely didn't at the time recognize how offensive it was, but he gets caught up in the heat of all the atrocities that are happening right now with Yorkshire.
I have a position on historic tweets. Yes. I don't like the punishment meted out for historic tweets.
And he removed it immediately. He said he removed it immediately when he heard that it was offensive.
I don't like it, but because Yorkshire are under so much pressure now, they're overreaching and trying to overcorrect. Andrew Gale, I think, is a victim of that. Because I don't think what he did was objectionable to warrant a suspension for something he did years ago, 10 years ago, deleted at the same time. It's like the Cavani tweet.
Yes.
Yeah? It's ridiculous. Anyway, we're breaking up the SportsMax, so we continue the show after these.